Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books Author Reading Series. If you'd like to learn more about us and our many upcoming author events, please visit skylightbooks.com, where you can browse our inventory, buy books, and join our Friends with Benefits Club. You can also follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook. To speak to a real live bookseller, please call 323-660-1175. Thanks for your support, and enjoy.
Thank you, and I'm really happy to be here celebrating Lucy's new novel. And I'm going to read a story that from Creature I don't think I've ever read out loud before. It's maybe slightly more autobiographical, not totally, than my other stories, so I think that's why I haven't read it, but I'm going to do it. So it's the first story in the collection, and it's called A Threadless Way. When I first moved here, I lived in a friend's room in a loft. I'd never lived in a loft before, and it was strange to do so in such a quiet place. Downtown was unlike any downtown I'd ever been in. Its emptiness surprised me, but it was empty only of certain kinds of people. They were around, but they lived on the sidewalk and in tents. And stores and businesses existed, but not the kind tourists want to shop at. The month, August, was hot, the way I like weather to be, and in the evenings when it cooled down, I rode my bike through the neighborhoods next to mine, and sometimes to a cornfield that someone had planted nearby. I would get off my bike and look at the plants, at the cobs of corn hidden in their pale green husks. I liked that the field was there, with the city's buildings so close to it. I liked that I was there. Across the street from where I lived was a school of architecture, and the huge dusty lot in front of the long building comforted me like the cornfield did. The building had once been a train station, and the friend whose room I was subletting had gone to this school. Even with all this comfort, though, I felt like a weird person. Sometimes in the loft, I could barely hold my head up as I talked to people. I couldn't look them in the eyes. I was happy and settled in my new life, but I was also limp, and maybe still shell-shocked by the anxiety I had regularly felt before moving. The people who lived in the loft had been there for a while, and I was an outsider who had come to stay in the empty room. In the living room area, several aloe plants sat on the table in front of large windows overlooking the school, and a motorcycle was parked in the corner. There were also several desks scattered around. Once in a while, I sat at one of the desks to write, but mostly I worked in my bed. One night, a guy who lived in a tent several blocks away from the loft said to me, "You don't look like a confident person." Was my lack of confidence apparent to people on the street? I didn't feel limp when I was alone. When I was walking around the city, I felt good then. Summer extended itself into September, and its sun was harsh and healing. Evenings were extremely pleasurable. It said you can't run away from your problems, and I knew that was true. I still had some problems, but others had completely disappeared. Some part of life was close to me, but another part was open. I had nothing to do, really, except go to yoga classes and the grocery store. Those things usually took a whole afternoon or evening, so in doing them, I felt I had been out around the city, had accomplished something, and I liked doing them. The yoga studio was small and clean, and in the bathroom, instead of disposable paper towels, neatly folded washcloths were set out on a shelf. I had already lived an adult life in my old city. Why was I now living a life so different from the one before? In the loft, the walls didn't reach the ceiling, so I was never alone. One of my housemates also studied architecture at the school across the street, the way my friend had, but did most of her work from home. Her room was right next to mine, and I could hear her move around, even in her bed. Our other housemate left in the mornings and returned at night. When he was at home, he worked on drawings at one of the desks while wearing headphones. He also ate there and watched things on his computer. Sometimes I talked on the phone, knowing my housemates could hear what I said. I talked about a project I was helping to organize in my old city, and I talked about how life was going for me in the new one. I wanted to advertise to my housemates that I had lived in a place where I'd had a job and also still had responsibilities, even if I had none where I was now living. During that time, I saw a movie about a woman who lived out of her car with her dog because she didn't have any money, and then lost the dog while traveling through Oregon. When she lost her dog, I couldn't stop crying. I've always felt a lot for animals, but I also related to the woman who lived out of her car. I thought I might be like her. One day I drove to the middle of nowhere with my friend whose room I was living in. He was home on a visit from Dubai. Once we had been very close, but those days were gone. Still, we attempted to spend time together. The sun was unimaginably harsh. I drove while my friend slept in the car. When he woke up, we stopped and got out to climb some rock formations that looked like they were crumbling, even though they were stuck to each other. Together, the rocks formed a microclimate for plants that grew in the shade they made, and for animals who could also survive there because of the shade. Short trees had sprouted up, and delicate plants. Little squirrel moss animals scurried around, though they weren't quite squirrels or mice. We sat under the shade of one of the trees to watch them. We didn't let our arms or our legs touch. At night, the air turned from hot to warm, and then it got chilly. "We don't know each other," I said. "Yes, we do. We're more like brother and sister now." When we went down an elevation on the ride home, it got warm again. There was no water around, but I felt it, like we were descending into a large, shallow sea. At home, I crawled into bed and read a story I had read many times before that I had taught in some of my classes. There was something in that story I wanted to sink into, the rich darkness of a barn, the putting the hand out into that darkness to see what it touched. I was no longer close to one friend, but I was becoming close to another. I thought about the second friend while pulling the covers over me. I lay all the way down, covering my head and face. "You were a writer," I thought. "Dante," someone yelled somewhere outside the building. "4 flights up in the middle of a desolate downtown. That is where you are." I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. Instead, I saw darkness, and then rock formations running into that darkness. What I didn't understand was how my friend and I could have become distant when we were probably more interesting people than we had been when we were close. Though I was weaker than I had been when we were close, and he was stronger. This probably had something to do with it. When I thought of the second friend, I felt comforted. The first time I felt this was when I had stopped by to visit him, and he was asleep. I knocked on his screen door, and he woke up to let me in. He wore a churidar and a pink shirt that was starting to tear on one of the shoulders. He got back into bed, and I sat in his desk chair next to him, and we talked about a book he was reading. I continued to wander around the city, absorbing something from it. I had very little money, but I've always identified with not having much, so it didn't bother me, except when I couldn't afford to make credit card payments. One evening, I rode my bike through a neighborhood where cheap clothes were sold. I bought myself a dress for $9.99. It was pretty, turquoise, with small black polka dots all over it, and sleeves that rose stiffly from my shoulders. I wore it to a museum, where in one of the galleries, I saw 4 ornate wooden chairs facing a whipping post. Light shone on the chairs and on the post, where the wood had splintered and turned old. On a gleaming table sat a pair of slave shackles, surrounded by intricately carved silver vases. An artist had found these things in a historical society in Maryland and exhibited them there together. Now they were here. I touched my dress, its cheap material. "What do you want from the city?" my friend had asked me in the car on our way home. "Nothing, just to live in it." "That's not true." "It is true." With no traffic on the freeway, my friend drove fast, much more so than I would have. "What do you want from Dubai?" "I want what everything wants." "Which is what?" I asked. He never answered. When I left the museum, it was starting to rain, and a guy called me over to his tent. It was a simple triangle, like the one my parents and I had taken camping when I was young. "What?" I asked him. He shrugged. "I'd like to invite you in." "Why?" You seem like a nice woman. I am. Your arm bends in a weird way, he said. I held my arms up in the rain. I know, it always has, both of them. Are you going to come in? No. Your loss. He unzipped the tent door and bent down to crawl inside. I could see part of a blue sleeping bag and a few magazines stacked on top of it. A lantern hung from the middle of the ceiling, and the guy turned it on. Back at the loft, I stood looking out of the window, at the school, its long shape extending into the darkness, at my arms, my shoulders, and my dress. I made it look like my arm was as long as the school. Later, when I had lived here for a while, my second friend and I visited an orchid estate. It was finally cold outside, but the greenhouse was warm. Water droplets collected on the plastic covering and window panes. I walked around looking at the orchids, at their ways of being in air. Some of them seemed like they were holding it, like they were spoons or bowls. Some faced the air, slender prongs pointing up, slender fangs pointing down. Some pushed through or away, small, strong flaps with light yellow ridges or dark red spots. I looked at the plants for a long time. Then I sat down in a chair and wrote in my notebook. I noticed it become evening. When I finally saw my friend again, he was carrying 2 orchids. In the car, we situated the plants in the back seat so they wouldn't fall over and rolled the windows down so they would get some circulation. Can we drive by the university, I asked. I'd like to see what the campus looks like. Sure. We drove through the campus where the lights from the building shone out into the grass. The buildings were new, with hardly anything to distinguish them from each other, except that some of them had more floors than the others, and in front of the library was a sculpture that looked like a coat hanger. A few students were sitting on it. I tried to imagine myself teaching there. That's enough, I said. I just wanted to have an idea so I could picture it in my head. It felt like something weird was going to happen, but nothing happened. I turned around and looked into the back seat. The orchids were upright. Everything was the same. I thought back to the period of time when it had taken me half an hour to eat a piece of toast. Back then, it had seemed as if I was living a life after it had already ended. Now, I could hardly take in enough. Thank you.
Amina, thank you for reading with me, and also thanks for having me, Skylight. I'm going to read maybe 10 minutes from my novel, and I think I'm going to read the slightly more shocking selection. I myself was shocked to learn that this novel is shocking, but apparently it is. So that's fun for us. I just have to find the page this is on. So this is a novel about a young woman who is a curator in a large museum in Manhattan that's on Fifth Avenue, but this is not a real museum. This is a made-up museum. And she comes to work one morning and something seems to have gone wrong, and that's basically the premise of the novel. She's also married at the beginning of the novel, and the passage or the part that I'm going to read is about her relationship with her husband, whose name is Whitaker, and also her relationship with one of her coworkers, whose name is Fred. And I don't think you need to know anything else right now. When Whit makes reference to her, he is referring to a woman named Estelle Duskin. And when I say he and I were married as children, I mean that I got married to him the summer when we were 25, 2 months before I started my doctorate. As is traditional in my family, this took place under the aegis, if not auspices, of Columbia University, where Whit and I had met as freshmen. And I was in love with Whit Giscombe in a way that made me feel I was doing a logical thing. Because when you're in love with someone in this way, you're going to spend the rest of your life loving them, which proposition still holds some unfortunate veracity for me. Whit once prank phone called a professor I felt had slighted me during my orals and pretended to be a concerned museum-going dermatologist, detaining the scholar on the phone for 2 hours one night discussing the finer details of rosacea in Titian and the more general biology of blushing on and around the human ass. He picked me daisies from store window boxes and stole carnations from diners. He drew me cards in crayon and ballpoint on my birthdays and holidays, inscribed with promises to love me all my life. These cards sported likenesses of hilariously deformed walruses and kittens. Our couch had multiple unnoticeable pea stains on it. He made me laugh so hard. But somewhere in the midst of what seemed to me a literally incredible store of good fortune, Whit was secretly pondering my disinterest in bearing children and finding that it disagreed with him. He wanted, as he began informing me just before he passed out from yet another survival-agnostic drinking bout, something he called a wife, someone who would be supportive. Because it was then my custom to work as many as 60 hours a week outside the domestic sphere, and because we were already married, I ignored him. And I ignored him because I, in fact, knew when he said such things exactly what he meant, that he was privately envisioning his parents' hallowed suburban partnership, their teenage wedding in the early 70s, his father's extrovert career first in litigation, then in local politics, his mother's charmed trajectory from high school co-ed to homemaker to part-time librarian, the manor outside Stamford and their main escape, his 4 identically gerbiloid siblings. I ignored him because I could not believe that he wanted any of these so-called comforts, what I, as a child of outsider yuppies, perceived as the wages of white privilege and cronyism, for himself, even as he was obsessively wanting them, pining after them, numbing his pain at the lack of them with tall boys and processed meat. I ignored him because Whit had read his Zinn and listened to his De La Rocha, and for a while wrote accomplished opinion pieces denouncing American historical amnesia for an undergrad review. I ignored Whit because Whit loved complexity and tolerated identity politics, because he loved me for my mind, which was complex, and I believed he wanted this complex mind to flourish in the cutthroat milieu into which I, Stella Crackus, had been, for better or worse, launched. But Whit no longer gave a damn about complexity, and the only way he was capable of caring for me or my identity was by leaving me in as slow and humiliating a fashion as his pickled brain could devise. It's also possible that I ignored him because I simply did not care enough at this point what he thought or wanted. Living with him sucked so hard. And there was something else. It was year 7.5 of our marriage, and I had been at C-Mart for about 6 months. A group of previously unseen early fracture book plates had come up at auction, and though German folk drawings are not my specialty, I felt that these represented a body of work the department's collection might usefully absorb. Anyhow, if I were eventually going to be recognized as an authority in early American works on paper, this was kind of the acquisition it was going to make sense for me to make as junior staff. Frederick Lew agreed with me, at least as far as the drawings were concerned. Who knows how he felt about me personally at this stage, and negotiated the necessary funds. We had lunch a couple of times, met with a few patrons together, and I got to know his face, how the corners of his eyes tensed during mental processing, how he sometimes liked to laugh in a natural, almost human manner once he was done with business. It was clear to me, too, that even if it might be going too far to say that he saw something in me, as the expression goes, he was relieved or refreshed or mildly enlivened to know that I was the higher maid. I did not bore him as a possible future head of the Department of American Objects, and that deficit of boredom was the kind of deficit into which it did not entirely displease him to gaze. And gaze he did, at length. And our discussions began to encompass more general departmental operations, not just the fracture acquisition. Fred sometimes sought my advice. One afternoon, we found ourselves feeding ducks together. It was odd. I began thinking about him on the weekends. I wrote him a note whenever he shared a point of view in a larger meeting to let him know what I thought of what he said. He expressed gratitude. He started coming to see me very briefly each day. He'd hover just beyond my open door. He smiled. I had simultaneously started seeing less and less of Wit, although I lived and slept and ate with him. Around Wit, I sometimes felt as if I were wrapped in invisible cotton batting, a body condom of some psychic sort. And though I believed that Wit was the partner of my life, and though I was gainfully employed, and though I had every material comfort, I was having difficulty seeing my future. One night, at the close of a particularly bitter tussle over the lack of groceries in the house, Wit had exclaimed, "We're not even having kids," and went on to smash a container of cottage cheese with his fist. I do not remember what this was apropos of, but the phrase stuck with me. It was very odd, not the sort of observation Wit had previously leveled, since, as I noted, it was not so much a criticism of me in particular as of the both of us together. And this, if not the dried cheese flecks lingering in local crevices over the months, made it seem like it had come out of someone else's mouth. Not that it wasn't Wit who was saying this line, but that he had heard it somewhere else first and was relaying the sentiment to me, who was here a mere secondary interlocutor as far as my husband was concerned, another item of furniture in a residence he'd ceased to cherish. I was lonely. I was also a little ashamed, if I am honest, of Wit, who, as far as I knew, had not read a book that was not a work of sports history in more than 36 months. He was taciturn at receptions and parties, frowning, flushed, impatient. He seemed at times exceedingly reluctant to spend time with me. I watched Frederick Lew. A server at a restaurant one afternoon leaned over after Fred had excused himself and told me, unasked, "You know, that man really likes you." Others elsewhere also seemed to indicate that this was indeed the case. And it felt plentiful, this liking, but also totally useless because I was partnered for life, and that was what I wanted, to be partnered for life. Not to mention that Fred had presumably had experiences of this nature before and was now having one of these experiences again, and that was the long and the short of it, that it was cyclical. It happened to him. Fred had trends, and this was the extent of his meaning. At least, this was what I fervently believed until one Friday, Fred asked me out for a drink. And I went, knowing in my gut what I was doing, and had this drink with him. And I went and had additional drinks with him on subsequent occasions, all the while knowing what I was doing. And we fed more ducks, now explicitly feeding ducks together. And then, one early September, when American Objects had decamped en masse to a rural Delaware location for a workshop in furniture appraisal and was residing in a series of brick huts at a former foundry turned B&B, I replied to a late-night email of Fred's bemoaning his lack of phone charger by appearing in person at the door of his hut, phone charger in hand, and he in turn responded by inviting me into his hut. And so I entered, and we were in his hut together and had extremely sweet and pleasurable sex, which we repeated on the subsequent evening. After this, all fucking hell broke loose. Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants. Oh, someone. Would you? Do you want to give her a microphone? I don't know for the podcast. No. Okay, it'll pick it up.
The two things. The easy thing is I want to know the meaning when he said we're not even having children, and I love the long sentence structure, and I love the echoing of other facilitators of the long sentence, like Cain's, even the suburban John, what's his name? I hate this so much, it's right, but
Do you mean John Updike?
but you're like a small version of everything we wanted out of Updike, but he could never deliver. And so I'm
Aw,
interested in
shucks.
all these influences. I mean, if you like Updike, then you can maybe explain it to the teacher and stuff. But when you said that about we're not even having children, I was inferring, or maybe I leaped to the end of my conclusion by feeling that he had heard that from someone he was having an affair with. So I probably didn't follow the logic of the sentence to its. Can you explain to me both those things?
Well, I think it's an ambiguous thing that Witt says. He says we're not even having children. What even? Why even? It sounds like there's like a list of other complaints too, or other problems, but it seems like Stella she's not aware of what those might be. But I would say your interpretation seems like that seems plausible to me, that someone else said that to him, and maybe it's someone he's having an affair with, yeah, or it could be someone else. Who knows? But Stella doesn't know who that is, who's said that.
When you get to the furniture at the end, so this phrase becomes furniture, and modern relation to objects.
Mm-hmm.
Objects take on emotions in modern literature a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I just really felt that that was so beautiful, the way the sentence descended into objects, and then I was absolutely sure he was having an affair, and that was one of the objects in the room that she could curate.
I like your reading a lot. Yeah, sure. And so just to say quickly, like when I wrote this novel, I thought a lot about the realist novel, and I think of the realist novel as being a 19th century French novel, not an American novel. But there are people like Updike who wrote a version of that, and so I'm interested in what that novel offers us, and many of the characters in this book are sort of social types in a certain way as much as they are, people we might be interested in. So the novel tries to explore different parts of this institution of the museum in that way. I mean, I guess, this kind of, this probably sounds maybe a little over the top, but I think about Balzac. That's the one realist novelist, basically, and everyone else is just sort of interested in that idea. But
I don't read Balzac in French, but your sentence structure is so defining of your style.
Well, that's just Stella. That's not me. That's not how I actually write. She just is like that. So something else I should have told you. She's an expert in satire and in satirical drawings and prints. Yeah, that's what she's interested in. Yeah, but that's it. That's sort of just her, though. It's not me or my writing style. She is a vehicle for that kind of style.
So this is your first novel?
Yeah, this is my first full-length, big novel. I hope so. I'm working on that. But thank you for asking. Yeah.
What you're saying about the narrative voice being overtaken by your character is just astounding to me. Also, everything you're saying to me is really very modern and astounding to me.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you like it.
Because I don't know what it is tonight, but I'm just thinking of other writers for some reason, and I suddenly realized this very difficult moral position you hold us in through your voice, and the only other author, and you're very different, but the only other author writing currently is Roxane Gay. She seems to hold this very authoritative moral position in her last book, Hunger, which is the most important book anybody's ever written for a long, long time. But I kept hearing Mary Gateskill through you. She's not a writer I really admire, and I know you're so much more brilliant than Updike, and you're so much more brilliant than Gateskill.
I love Mary Gateskill.
Oh.
Yeah. I probably think of her a little bit as an influence.
Tell me what you like about her so I can appreciate it.
Well, it's been several years since I've read one of her books, so I probably can't speak too closely, but there's something in the narrative voice of one of her stories that I really like. Bad Behavior is a collection that I like a lot, and there's another one I can't remember the name of right now, but I don't know, I like the weird sort of fictional situations in her stories. There's certain, I'm thinking about that story, I don't know if it's called Secretary, but it's the story that movie is, the movie Secretary is based on. There's this, the narrator is standing looking out at cars, and there's something about static electricity in hair or something. I don't know. It's kind of far from me since I've not read it for several years, but I don't know if that's an image. I'm always really kind of,
That tension.
when I'm writing and reading, drawn to images, and there's something, there's some tension in that.
So then my second question would be of you, so that tension. What's so seducing about that tension?
I like tension. I'm always drawn to tension, whether it's I'm not drawn to awkward tension in life. I find it really difficult, to experience, but I often maybe putting characters in awkward situations or sort of tense. I don't know, I think sometimes I'm drawn more to the tension of resolving the tension, or to, I don't know, just being in that space.
Does it sit out the drawing for it? Or is that wrong?
I don't know that I see my writing necessarily as moral. I think probably some of my morals, my own personal morals, come out in my stories, or the novel that I'm working on right now. But
Where does your authority come from?
I don't know. I feel like I write more about vulnerability. I don't know that I think a lot about authority, when I'm writing, or, in the story that I read tonight, it's a lot about vulnerability. I tend to, I often or I sometimes write about the writing process in a way that's even different than my own. Like when I'm writing, I feel usually very connected to the process, but for some reason I'm always writing about narrators who have a really hard time writing, or it's like a very vulnerable place for them. So I guess authority just doesn't, I'm not thinking about it when I'm writing, or maybe even now I'm thinking about the stories.
I love the strength of language from yours. So interesting.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have questions? For
I don't know, piecing in terms of writing, whether that particular part that you wrote, what parts came quickly and what parts were more belabored, and was like structural stuff more belabored, and then the actual filling in came in first?
I think I was looking on this book for maybe 6 years or something like that, and it went through 3 or 4 different drafts. But I'm not a big laborer at writing. Like I just go for walks and decide what will happen, and then I sit down and write it, and then I'll just cut things if it doesn't end up working. So it takes a long time to write a book, but I don't think about the language in a very rational way when I'm working, like actually when I'm, but good question. Okay. Well done.
anyone else have questions?
Do you guys have questions for each other? That would be interesting.
No, I'm an awkward person, so it's probably better for me not to ask questions.
What was that? There was a comment I meant when you were reading. I meant to sort of say something about this, but then I got too nervous as I was introducing myself. But the thing that you said, someone in the story says something about cities and how we should think about, or someone asks,
What do you want?
what do you want the city to do, or what do you want to do with the city? And I don't know, I thought that was an interesting way of, I mean, maybe it's more a comment or something like that, but a way of thematizing what the story was about through this sort of external comment that's being made, but that you don't really make hay with afterwards. You let it be there and just kind of radiate some things.
I mean, part of it, I think, obviously for that character, there's a lot happening in terms of her relationship to this new city, this new place that she lives in. But I was trying to explore, I guess, this distance between the two characters. And so I think if someone asked me that question, I would feel kind of weird about it. Like, what do you want from this city you just moved from? Like you're trying to get something from it, or, somehow your relationship to it isn't pure. So I think that kind of part of the dialogue just came out of wanting to get into that tension between the two characters, or their growing distance.
That makes me think of a question for you, Lucy, that you were talking about the figures in your book being realist and types. And I love Balzac. I'm a big Balzac phase. And so I'm excited to read your book thinking about Balzac. And so I was going to ask, thinking about cities, are the types of characters in your book, do you feel like they're New York types? Like, is this a realist?
Yeah.
Is the
Yes.
realist book about New York City?
Yes, they are. They are people who can only exist within New York.
Yeah. I know a little of that, I feel like with her,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, of course, it's not the real, it's a fictional New
Yeah.
York also, so I'm always, every time I read it or think about it, I'm always dissatisfied with its attempt to point to or represent New York as I actually experience it, which is, I guess, just the agony that you have to live with after you try to be ambitious in this way.
Do you think when you read in New York, people will more, feel more, they will recognize those types more typically in other cities or people in other cities?
It's quite possible that they will, yes. Yes. They may even, think that I have written something about them. It happens.
Oh, my goodness. I was just going to make a follow-up comment that it was such an interesting hearing because Amina's work has so much space in it, and it just feels very Western to me. Like it's a story about coming to the West and being in this space of abeyance, or just waiting for something some content to fill a life. And I'm from New York. Like the sentence structure of your character's thoughts is so directed in this very New York way, like the labyrinthine social ladder that you have to climb. That's not like a one-way ladder. So it was just like a fantastic, kind of counterintuitive pairing. I really appreciated the expressions of the city, even though New York just comes in like in the docks in Central Park or something, like it's transfigured into something larger, like a sentence structure and a directedness of like dog eat dog, like careerism or something.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, you grew up in New York, right? I mean, how has your experience changed being, I assume, you find yourself in museums on Fifth Avenue or elsewhere in the city as a young person, and how has your experience in the structures and sort of the communities inside museums changed over your life?
Okay. Well, I just, as one does when one gets older and is, trying to make a living and things like that, I just think a lot more about the people who work at museums and how they both produce what you see when you come in and then are doing a lot of other things that can't really be seen or interpreted by the public. So that is, I guess it has become interesting to me also to try to understand why people work in arts administration. It's a particularly can be particularly like fraught kind of profession because you love art and you're around artists all the time, but you are not an artist. You're something else. But what that thing is very poorly defined. And so I have actually done this kind of work myself, and it's a very strange kind of social and also just kind of practical task to administrate the art. So I've just become fascinated with that and with those people, and what they do, what they're trying, what their ambitions are, what their visions are. I just
Any other questions before we go back to you? Okay, we'll do one more question from you, and then we'll have a signing.
Amina, I was having this debate on Facebook with my friends today about why on earth are we worried about the Salvation Army, their false religious interests, or how all these charities steal money through putting their office staff in utopian offices and don't really care about cancer or whatever charity is arranging itself. And it seems so obvious to me that you would care for the person in your neighborhood, getting him up off the ground. And one of my favorite activities is when I get on the 405 at Venice National, I see this encampment that gets righted through underneath the freeway. And sometimes it's a peaceful little community with all their tents set up and the lights and the TVs going. And sometimes they raise it and you just see this drama happening to this little community informing and supporting each other there. I mean, it's almost the most important thing I see in my day, actually. So you're actually tapping these people. I don't know if you're talking to these people or what you're thinking or feeling, but you are pointing to them, and they are a tense spot. Some people don't even see these people. So could you riff more on what you're doing?
Well, I'll just say that in some of the stories in Creature, and definitely in the novel that I've been working on, I keep kind of going towards issues of class and sometimes poverty, and it's not something that I've set out to do. And I don't know, that in that story that I'm doing, it's almost like I move towards it, and it becomes, in this story, and it kind of becomes part of things, but I'm not necessarily commenting on it a lot. But yeah, I will just say I don't normally kind of start out and think like I'm going to write about class, but it seems to be something I keep sort of moving towards in various ways. So I think in this story it was just a moving towards it in some way.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lucy and Amina.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget that you can listen to this and all of our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.